There's this actress, Julia Fox.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Taurus Moon. She's an Aquarius Sun, though. And if you Google images of her at public events, she is wearing the most shockingly risque clothing that you could imagine.
I think I've seen a couple images. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, like she
goes there.
She goes there. But she's an Aquarius. So like when you say like, well, Aquarius can be kind of taboo. It's the taboo in the public realm.
Right.
It's, I think of Aquarius as like coming out of the closet.
Mm-hmm. Taking the taboo in the closet and coming out with it.
Coming out with, Scorpio is the taboos in the closet. Aquarius is the taboos out of the closet.
Mm-hmm.
And like I saw a quote from her recently that said that she has been celibate for the last 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. But yet it's such a funny Aquarius thing because Aquarius is like so rebellious, but also so conservative. It's like she's basically wearing her underwear under a trench coat. It's like, like metal underwear under a trench coat and like showing it to everyone, but then also saying, I'm not having sex.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit, a podcast exploring the intersection of Western astrology and Jungian psychology. Astrology is a language that communicates how the planets and stars influence life on Earth, while psychology helps us navigate both conscious and unconscious experiences. Together, these tools offer the potential for self-understanding, growth, and transformation. Join astrologer Scott Tajarian and me, psychotherapist Gabriela Durso, as we dive into the cosmic forecast each week.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit. This is the week of June 10th to the 16th. Before we get started into the week, I just wanted to talk about this film I saw recently. And I'm bringing it up because a couple episodes ago, we were talking a lot about history and that sort of stuff. And it's a really great film that I thoroughly enjoyed by one of my favorite filmmakers, Alexander Payne. One of my favorite films that he did was Sideways, that movie with Paul Giamatti. Where
did we watch that together?
We did.
Maybe a while ago.
Yeah. His most recent film, I believe, is this film called The Holdovers. Which
is that the one you watched?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. First of all, Alexander Payne is a Aquarius Sun and a Sagittarius Moon. And Aquarius and Sagittarius, to me, are two of the funniest signs.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just brilliant when it comes to humor, because Sagittarius will say anything. They're just, the truth teller. And Aquarius,
they can kind of make light of heavier things.
Yeah.
Which is often a way, I think, to deal with.
They have their unique view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That I find to be hilarious oftentimes. And so,
especially that combination.
Part of the reason I feel like what makes him such a great filmmaker is like his films are melancholy, but yet there's a lot of humor in the melancholy of the films.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I bring this up is because this film, The Holdovers, which stars Paul Giamatti, who was in Sideways, and Dominic Sessa, and Divine Joy Randolph. Divine Joy Randolph won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for this film. She's a fellow 1986er.
What a beautiful name. I actually don't know who that is.
She's amazing. She's amazing in the film. And all three of these are the three main characters. All three of them have Gemini in their primal triad. Paul Giamatti and Divine Joy Randolph are both Gemini suns. Paul Giamatti is a Taurus Moon, and Divine Joy Randolph is a Libra moon. And then Dominic Sessa is a Scorpio sun and a Gemini moon. So The Holdovers is this film about this private school. It's like a high school, private high school. And Dominic Sessa plays this student who has to stay at school during the holiday break because his mom is off with his stepdad. And his dad is, well, I don't want to give away too much. Paul Giamatti plays this curmudgeon-y history teacher that nobody likes. And he is the one who is charged with keeping an eye on this student during the holdover, the holiday break. And Divine Joy Randolph plays the cook at the boarding school. But what struck me and why I wanted to bring it up is because there's this one scene, the whole story is you see these two characters that don't like each other, the student and the teacher, that they build a relationship with one another during this holdover period. There's this hilarious scene where they're in Boston and they're at this bookstore that's outside. It's lightly snowing. It's freezing cold. And it's the teacher and the student. And the teacher, Paul Giamatti, is reading a book, and the student, Dominic Sessa, is behind him looking through some books. And this woman comes up to Paul Giamatti. "Hey there, handsome. Got a cigarette?" "Nope, sorry, I smoke a pipe." And then she says, "How about a date then? You want a date?" And he's like, "No, thank you." "Oh, come on, let's go somewhere warm." She's like trying to seduce him. And the student's like, "Go ahead, I can wait here." See, he can wait here and read some books. He doesn't mind if daddy gets a little candy cane. and he says, "Thank you, but I never really liked candy cane. Plus, I'm pre-diabetic." And so she turns and leaves. She's like, just like, oh my God, this guy's hopeless, And so the student's like, "If you do want a little candy cane, I won't tell anyone." He says to the student, "Mr. Tolley, for most people, sex is 99% friction and 1% goodwill. Call me old-fashioned, but I place value on physical intimacy. So should you." The student's like, "You've never had sex, have you?" And he says, "Believe it or not, Mr. Tolley, there was a time when the fire in my loins burned white hot." And
how old is the student supposed to be?
He's like 16, 17 years old. And that's what the teacher is telling the student. And the student's like, "You're full of shit." Because, he's like, there's no way this guy ever, he's an old man that's disgusting and no one would ever want to have sex with him. That's what he's thinking. He's like, "Oh, the details would curl your toes." And so he's like, "Oh, we're finally getting to the good stuff." That's what the student's saying. Let's hear. He said, "Maybe when you're 18, it would curl your toes." And so then they cut to this museum. The student is just bored out of his mind. "Are we almost done? What's your hurry? I thought you liked antiquity." "In class, maybe, but I never think about it unless I need to." "Oh, well, here, what do you see?" And he says, "I don't know, a bunch of pottery." And he said, "Look at that one." And it's a plate with a woman who's bent over and a man who's behind her. So he's like, "What do you see there?" And he looks at it and then turns. He's like, "Candy cane." And he says, "Yes, see? There's nothing new in the human experience. Each generation thinks it invented debauchery or suffering or rebellion, but man's every impulse and appetite from the disgusting to the sublime is on display right here all around you. So before you dismiss something as boring or irrelevant, remember, if you truly want to understand the present or yourself, you must begin in the past." You see, history is not simply the study of the past. It's an exploration of the present. And that really struck me.
That's profound.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the kid's like, see, when you see it like that and you throw in some pornography, it's a lot easier to understand.
Suddenly clicks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That was really profound to me. I really recommend that film if you haven't seen it, The Holdovers.
Well, the interesting thing about boredom is that we tend to think that boredom is sort of the absence of any kind of feeling, but there's actually a lot of anger in boredom.
What do you mean by that? Where does that come from? Like, why do you say that?
I can just feel it. I mean, I feel it
When you say you're bored, I can tell you're angry.
Yeah, when I feel
this is so boring. Yes.
When I feel bored, which I would say was a big theme of mine in my adolescence, but even through undergrad many years ago. And yeah, I think of boredom sometimes as maybe the inability to connect with the meaning or the lesson of something. Like, boredom to me indicates that you're not really interacting on a deeper level with your experience. So there's sort of a separation that you're feeling and possibly co-creating.
Yes.
That is inherently connected to anger.
Yes. That makes so much sense because this character, this student, is really angry.
Well, and what we know about anger is that it's an indication that there's some sort of issue with boundaries. And typically we think of boundaries as being someone sort of encroaching in your space. Like you don't have enough space, but boundaries can also be the opposite if you have too much space. So I'm thinking about this character who was sort of left by his parents for this period of time. That's actually kind of too much space. And that can also be a boundary issue. Like there's not enough connection. There's too much room.
Yes.
And I think that's common. That can sort of happen in adolescence because the person who's in that adolescent state kind of toggles between needing a lot of space and then actually needing a lot of closeness. But because I think there's so much angst during that season of life, there's a tendency for the parent maybe to just give a lot of space, like let me give a wide berth here. So that's just kind of what's coming up for me is maybe an interpretation.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So it's like, because he has way too much space during this holiday time where he's like at the last place he wants to be during the holidays at school, all by himself, basically with this teacher and the woman who cooks the food and the janitor. That's it. It's the four of them, basically. And so that's super boring. Too much space. Anger because of the boredom that he's been left during the holidays in this situation. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting misconception about boredom.
Yes.
We think of it as like it's this neutral territory, but it's really not.
No, it's not. It's charged for sure. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I love that reflection.
That must be what you were watching the other night when you were laughing by yourself.
It was.
In the office.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I was like, oh, this is good. So, so this week we are going to be covering several different transits highlighted by Venus transiting into Cancer. But before we get to the transits, I do want to point out, as I did last week, sort of like that fair warning to those that are going to be experiencing intense transits with the Sun or with Mars. So the Sun either opposing or squaring Pluto, or Mars opposing or squaring Pluto as well. So if you were born between 1967 and 1970, this week, as the Sun transits from 19 to 26 degrees in Gemini, it's going to be squaring your Pluto. And for those that were born between 2003 and 07, the Sun will be opposing your Pluto. Mars is transiting from 0 to 5 degrees in Taurus, which means those born between 1983 and 1986, Mars will be opposing your Pluto. So when the Sun or Mars makes these hard aspects to Pluto, the Sun, you go through this potentially difficult transformation of your identity. And I think of the Sun as the battery that's powering your human ship, and life is growth. So we're met with different challenges that facilitate that growth. And twice a year, the Sun squares your Pluto. Once a year, the Sun opposes your Pluto. For those born between 1967 and 70 and 2003 and 07, you're getting hit with the Sun and Pluto aspects. Mars, on the other hand, is the planet of action, the planet of aggression. It's that drive energy, that go energy. So for those that were born between 1983 and 86, you may be really working towards something, and maybe there's a roadblock that comes up in some way, and you're feeling at odds with whatever is impeding your path to get to where you want to go.
So what would you encourage people who are going through this experience with either of those transits to do?
Number one, I would say take it easy on yourself.
Take it easy on yourself. It could be a hard week. So, I always like to say, on the easy days, work hard, and on the hard days, take it easy. And this might be a week to just give yourself some grace, to slow down, to take your time, to realize that whatever challenges that you're facing right now, they will pass. And what can we learn from these challenges? In what way am I needing to change or transform? Because that's ultimately what's happening with the alignment of Pluto. Pluto's the planet of transformation. It's the god of death. So you're going through a death and rebirth. What does that mean to you?
So these are people with Pluto in what sign?
So the sun is transiting through Gemini, and for those that were born between 1967 and 1970, they were born with Pluto in Virgo. So Virgo is mutable earth. Gemini is mutable air. Both mutable, it makes a strong connection, but air and earth don't mix. That creates the tension, the challenge. They're 90 degrees apart from each other. So with the sun moving from 19 to 26 degrees in Gemini, those that were born between 1967 and 1970 were born with Pluto between 19 and 26 degrees in Virgo. For those born between 03 and 07, they were born with Pluto at 19 to 26 degrees in Sagittarius, which is opposite Gemini, which is not as tense as the square, but can still be very tense and very challenging. For those that were born between 1983 and 86, they were born with Pluto in Scorpio between degrees 0 and 5, which is where Mars is transiting through Taurus, opposing that Pluto in Scorpio. Now, I should also mention, too, I guess, people that were born between 1937 and 1941 were born with Pluto between 0 and 5 degrees in Leo, and Mars is going to be squaring their Pluto as well. So that's going to be intense for them.
I think it's interesting to consider how Pluto as a generational planet is really sort of indicating how large groups of people experience transformation.
Yes.
And I think, before I had an understanding of astrology, I thought that there was kind of one way you transform.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I understand that where Pluto is in your chart really indicates how you experience transformation and what that actually looks like for you.
Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of ways to transform.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of indications of transformation happening through the transiting planets in your astrological code.
Well, and would you say too, this is one of the reasons why there tends to be maybe conflict between different generations?
Yes.
Because there are sort of different experiences, different beliefs around what transformation means.
Yes, totally. Like, for instance, the Scorpio Pluto generation is very different from the Leo Pluto generation. The Leo Pluto generation is that generation that was born between 1937 and 57. It's this 20-year period. Leo's the king. So those people showed up to Earth and were like, we want to take this over. You know, it's like they're the ones that were protesting in the streets in the 1960s, and a lot of fire energy, very extroverted. You know, think of all the presidents that we've had that were born with Pluto in Leo, and they still don't want to give up their power.
Mm-hmm.
Trump, Biden, Bush too, Bill Clinton, they are all from the Pluto and Leo generation. It's like, from my cold, dead hands, I'm going to hold on to this throne because I'm the king.
Well, and Leo essentially is about power.
Yes.
So the way that they experience transformation is by being in power.
Exactly.
Which is why they don't want to let it go.
Right. But the conflict
Right?
between, yes, exactly. But the conflict between them and the Scorpio generation is the Scorpio generation, which was 83 to 95. Those people really upset the Leo generation because they didn't adhere to the same rules as them. They're like, no, we're not going to shop in your stores. We're going to shop online. We're going to, they're the Scorpion.
Mm-hmm.
So they're more introverted. We're going to hide behind our computers and that sort of stuff. And like the Leo generation is like, wait, no, you can't do that. They changed everything. It forced the Leo generation to do things differently. I think back to like an earlier point that I think you were trying to make is there's like these collective transformations that occur with the generations. Because we're talking about a wide swath of people here this week that are going to go through a transformation. We're talking about people that were born between years,
Right.
Not between your birthday's on this day, then you're going through a transformation. No, we're talking about years. So there's literally generations of people that are changing and transforming each and every week. And that's how we continue to evolve and level up collectively on this planet.
And some of those transformations are more harmonious than others.
Yes.
I imagine.
Yes.
If it's a square, it's
intense.
It might be difficult.
Yeah, difficult. So like, when you think of where Gemini is right now, or where the sun is right now in Gemini, if you were born with Pluto in Libra, if you were born between 1978 and 1982, you're probably going through a positive transformation right now where it feels really good because Libra's air, Gemini's air. And as far as Mars goes, if you were born between 1957 and 1961, you're probably going through a positive transformation right now because people that were born between 57 and 61 were born with Pluto in those first few degrees of Virgo, which is going to form a trine, which is a supportive aspect to Mars in Taurus because they're both earth signs. So there are periods where it's like the transformation feels good, I'm thriving, and there's other times where it's like, oh my God, this again, I'm getting broken down to bits.
Mm-hmm. And what we can say about transformation, even though it happens differently for each generation, is because it's this Pluto energy, there's a birth and a death process at the same time. So I think about an image of transformation is a snake shedding its skin, and there might be times where it feels really good to let something go, like taking off a jacket on a hot day or something. could be other times where it feels like, oh, I don't know if I'm done with this.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming off, but I might still need that, or
Right.
I feel exposed
Yes.
in some way.
This might be one of those more exposed times for the
Mhm.
dates that I gave that are experiencing the squares or the oppositions.
Right. There are times where we really call in that transformation, and
Mhm.
other times
And we're ready for it.
and we're ready for it, and other times it can feel kind of forced upon us in some way.
Exactly. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Should we move on to the week?
Let's move on.
Similar to last week, I want to kind of group everything together where we're
Okay.
like looking at several transits that involve the 4 personal planets, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Let's begin with Mars. Mars, because there's only one transit with Mars, so we'll start with Mars, and then we'll move to the Sun, Mercury, and we'll conclude with Venus. So Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, as we said, it's transiting through Taurus. It's the beginning period of its transit through Taurus. And of course, as planets are transiting into a new sign, typically if it's a air sign, a fire sign, or a fixed sign, the first aspect it's going to make is with Pluto in Aquarius. So Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, transiting through the fixed earth sign symbolized by the bull, Taurus, is squaring off with Pluto, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, which is transiting retrograde through the fixed air sign symbolized by the water bearer, Aquarius. This transit is occurring from June 8th to the 10th, so from last Saturday to this coming Wednesday, with an exact square happening on Tuesday, June 11th. Very intense here. Very intense. I don't know what's happening out there in the world, but this is kind of one of those hold on to your hat transits, because things are coming to a head right now, where the god of war is squaring off with the god of death.
It feels like a volcano erupting or something.
Could be that. Could be that. So as Mars transits through Taurus, our drive is centered on our values, our self-worth. What action am I needing to take in order to secure what I value? And that may feel like it is at odds with the transformation that is occurring within the group construct.
So is there kind of a theme of individual versus the group?
Yes.
In a way?
Exactly.
And so the energy is encouraging us to follow more of the what's best for us individually?
Well, it's
even
about,
if it's at odds with the group?
It's about trying to, we need to find the balance between the two.
Between the two.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And there may be a lot of tension around finding that balance, but that is the goal. We're being forced into that situation.
Well, ultimately, because you've said this many times, ultimately what's best for the group is also what's best for the individual, because a group is made up of individuals.
Exactly.
But it's kind of a paradox.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. Yes. It is a paradox. How, but it's like I guess the paradox is, what is the line between selfishness and selflessness within the group? It's like I need to embrace my individuality and celebrate my values, and I want to do so in a way that attracts the right people, the right group to be around me.
The right group that supports you in having those individual needs met.
Because they also value what you value, or they respect what you value.
Because I think the wrong group is going to see it as selfish.
Right.
But the right group is going to see it as, okay, these are just your needs. This is what you value.
Yes. And there may be some breakup of the group here,
mm-hmm.
where you find yourself at odds with the group, because you realize that the group is actually these aren't my people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't honor, reflect, or respect my values, and I don't value what they value.
And maybe that's part of the transformation. That's part of
Yes.
what has to die.
Exactly. And that's the challenge, because maybe it's a group that you've been a part of for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And now you see things differently. You've changed, you've evolved, or the group has evolved and you've stayed the same, or whatever it is. You're on two different paths now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's finding the balance between the two, or ending it because it's not working anymore.
Mm-hmm. So I really hear this as being about prioritizing your needs
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that in doing so, it will bring you to the right community.
I love that.
And that maybe we don't have to think of it as being a conflict.
Yes.
We can sort of frame it as what's best for you is going to be what's best for the community.
Yes.
If it's really a match.
Yes. I love that. But I guess, it's still hard maybe to leave the group
It's still
behind
hard.
or to see somebody leave the group.
Of course.
Yes.
Well, have you ever seen a snake shedding its skin before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I had an experience a couple years ago when I was out for a walk
Mhm.
in our old neighborhood.
I
And
think I remember that.
yeah, it's the first time it was literally in my path.
Yes.
I was clearly meant to have this experience
Uh-huh.
of watching the snake shed its skin. And it sort of was rubbing up against some old grass on the path,
Yeah.
like trying to get this old skin to
Get off.
get off. And it looked like a lot of work.
Yeah, it looked uncomfortable, right?
It looked really uncomfortable because when you're in that transformation mode, you can't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of us are trying to transform while we're also like at work and cooking dinner and taking care of, our pets and our children and families, etc.
Yes.
But it really, when you're in that deep transformational mode,
Uh-huh.
you kind of can't do anything else well. I mean, you have to just allow yourself to be in that process, which is not really how our society is built.
Well, yes,
Like,
totally.
we don't have
right?
transformation days at
exactly.
work.
Take the day off because you're transforming.
Like, I'm
right
not
now.
sick. I'm just transforming.
Which we should have transformational days.
Mars is squaring my Pluto. I
Mars
need the
is
day
squaring
off.
my Pluto this week, so I'm gonna, these first 3 days of the week, I'm gonna be off. Okay, yeah, totally. I understand. That's fine. Yeah,
Yeah, that would have gone over really well at my corporate job.
but that's how things should be. That's like my dream for changing the corporate environment. Because I think about, like, you bring up a good point. Like, when you're going through a transformation, you can't really do anything else. Think about Pluto. Pluto's the planetary ruler of Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign that rules the colon and the genitals. When you're having a bowel movement or when you're having an orgasm, you're not really doing anything
You're
other than that.
not multitasking.
Yeah, you're not
typically.
multitasking. You're not
Uh-huh.
multitasking when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And corporate America, I think, respects people's privacy in those realms. So,
Mhm.
if you could be able to explain to corporate America that you're actually going to get more production out of your workforce if you give, when they're going through these transformational days, give them the few days off.
I did once have a boss follow me into the bathroom to reprimand me about something.
While you were having a bowel movement?
I wasn't having a bowel movement, but I had gone to sort of like hide in the stall.
Yeah.
And she followed me in there. It was a super aggressive move.
So what was that about?
I had sort of delegated a responsibility she had given me to someone else.
Yeah. And
'Cause,
she
like,
found out about it?
Well, it's funny in these corporate settings because you're all sitting like, 2 feet away from each other,
Yeah.
emailing each other
Yeah. Oh
in a
my
big
God.
silent room. It's a
Yeah.
really weird.
So weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird setup. And so she had seen the email where I sort of, added someone and asking them to do what she had asked me to do.
Uh-huh.
And she didn't really enjoy that.
Oh.
So I had gotten up to go in the bathroom. She followed me in.
And what did she say? don't delegate this? Or
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
upset because I had
Yeah.
sort of kind of gone. I think she experienced it like I had gone over her head,
Mm-hmm.
but she was asking me to do something that I didn't think was really my job.
So what happened? You ended up doing it, what she wanted you to do?
No,
You didn't. You fought back.
I fought back,
Yeah.
and I didn't come out of the stall either.
Oh, good. Good. Wow. You
Yeah.
stood your ground.
Yeah, she and I had an interesting kind of a karmic
Mm-hmm.
thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to know her astrological chart.
I think we know a little bit about it, don't we?
I don't think this is the person you think it is.
Oh, okay.
This is someone else.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to say about transformation is you're talking about the genitals. I'm thinking about the menstrual cycle.
Yes, exactly.
And how sort of the messaging that women receive is that you're supposed to just be out in the world, kind of business as usual.
Right.
But that on a biological level is a death process. It's literally speaking of shedding
Yes.
your skin or shedding,
Yes.
on a physical level, that is what's occurring with a menstrual cycle.
Uh-huh.
And it really is an intense experience. And yet we don't have days off for that.
Well,
we don't give any sort of, that would not be really perceived well if women started saying that that's what they needed to do.
Well, so this makes me think of what one of our neighbors told us.
What?
About how there was this family that lived in the neighborhood here.
Oh, I remember
and they
this.
owned
Yeah.
2 homes.
Uh-huh.
And during the wife's menstrual cycle,
she went to the other home.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had her own space.
Yeah.
But wasn't it also a house for like more than that family?
I think it was.
It was a house for like a group of women.
All the women would go there
right.
and stay in this house when they were during their menstrual cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people would think that that's really archaic thinking, but you would rather go to that house and have your alone time? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to be able to go to a space where that was respected.
Yes.
I mean, there are all sorts of kind of guidelines about women being involved in different ceremonial groups and activities when they're menstruating, because energetically there's a really powerful exchange happening. So like, for example, in an ayahuasca ceremony, you're not supposed to go if you're having a menstrual cycle because it can throw off
the rhythm of
the group, because what you're going through is so powerful. It kind of, I think of it as like a vortex almost, can kind of pull people in a way that's not helpful for their process.
Right.
But you also aren't supposed to go to a sweat lodge if you're in a menstrual cycle. But I believe that there are separate lodges for women to go who are all having that experience together, similar to what you're describing, to go to this house.
Yes.
Where that there can be
a support group.
Yeah, a shared experience of that transformation.
Yes.
In a way that can be beneficial.
It's so fascinating to me. I remember I opened up this new restaurant, and within like a couple months, all the women were having their menstrual cycle at the same time.
They synced up.
Yeah, they synced up. So fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So moving on to the sun. This week, the sun makes 2 major aspects. So the sun is the giver of light, life, and vitality. And the sun is transiting through the mutable air sign symbolized by the twins, Gemini. And the first aspect that the sun makes while it's transiting through Gemini this week is a sextile, a supportive aspect to Chiron, the wound and the ancient wisdom that is unlocked through healing that wound, which is transiting through the cardinal fire sign symbolized by the ram, Aries. This transit occurs from Monday to Friday, June 10th to the 14th, with an exact sextile occurring on Wednesday, June 12th. So just thinking about the earlier transit with Mars and Pluto, that transformation, action, self-worth, the community, values in the community. The sun transiting through Gemini is creating an opportunity to ask questions, gather information, learn a little bit about a lot. The connection to Chiron is helping us face our fears and insecurities with asking those questions. Being afraid, oh, that's a dumb question. They're going to think I'm dumb if I ask that. No. What are your fears? What are your insecurities? How can you be more authentic? What are the questions that you want to ask so that you feel seen? And so that you're able to see others, so you have a greater clarity of the group, perhaps, and the reflection of your values or the lack thereof.
I had kind of an experience like this yesterday.
What happened?
Well, as you know, I'm integrating EMDR into my therapy practice.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Which is a really powerful modality.
Yes.
For anyone who isn't aware, it's a therapeutic tool that supports you in reprocessing anything from a mild disturbance up to an actual trauma. So it works with the way that memories are stored in the brain through a process of bilateral stimulation to help you essentially take those memories that might be stored in short-term memory as an activation and actually move them to the part of the brain where long-term memory is stored. So it's kind of redistributing how much energy and activation a certain memory is holding for you. And so I'm doing these hours, consulting hours with the group that I studied with and going in and asking questions and clarifying. And I ended up having the most questions in the group. And I kept sort of checking in with other people. Like, is it okay that I'm taking up this much space with these questions? And one of the women in the group, she's like, oh, you're asking great questions. I'm learning a lot. And it was really this sort of, it's exactly what these transits are about, where when you have a question, you're probably not the only one who has that question.
Exactly. Yes.
And that came through loud and clear for me yesterday. And I ended up speaking for, it's a 2-hour group with several of us. I probably asked questions for almost an hour.
Wow.
It was pretty
good for you.
Wild.
Yes.
Yeah. And I had a lot of questions. I'm always someone who wants to make a process my own. So
what do you mean? Yeah.
I want to learn the rules and then I want to
I get it.
Maybe break some of them.
Yes. Yes.
I want to make it my own. I don't always agree with the way that I've been taught.
Yes.
And I'm still in the process, though, of needing to make sure I've learned it clearly before breaking the rules, so to speak.
You have to know the rules inside and out before you can adjust them, break them, or make it your own. Right?
Absolutely. So that's part of sort of the energy I was coming in with all of these questions. And I really appreciated the woman who was hosting the group, the teacher, because she was really, it was almost like we were in this game of like ping pong. Every question I asked, she sort of pinged it back. Like she really did a great job of kind of keeping it really concise and keeping it light. It really felt like it embodied this Gemini energy. And it was, really, really beneficial for me. And the more questions I asked, the more I got out of it. And then to hear that that's how the
other
group
people
felt
were getting
too.
a lot out of it too. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. That's such a great affirmation. And so when you think about these first two transits that we're talking about, and we're talking about Pluto in Aquarius, the group, Mars in Taurus, which is values, and then the sun in Gemini, which is asking questions, and Chiron in Aries is facing those fears. If you can face your fears and insecurities and ask the questions, you, like you were doing, benefited the group. You felt valued. Other people in the group felt value from the time that they were spending there because they were getting a lot of great information. Because of the questions you were asking that were facilitating this interesting conversation.
Exactly.
Yes, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Gabriella. So the second transit of the sun this week actually involves the sun and the planetary ruler of Gemini, Mercury, which is the messenger of the gods, guide of souls to the underworld, the planet of consciousness, communication, coordination, the god of merchants and thieves. The sun forms a conjunction with Mercury in Gemini, the sign that Mercury rules, from June 12th to the 16th. That's Wednesday to Sunday, with an exact conjunction occurring on Friday, June 14th. So, this is bringing that light, life, and vitality to the mind, to conscious awareness. So you were facing your fears and insecurities with the sun sextile Chiron. And now that you face those fears and insecurities, hopefully by the end of the week, by Friday, like the conversation is really flowing. It's an easy flow of questions and answers and curiosity leading to more questions and so on and so forth. And a lot of connecting happening. Like, who can you connect to? Who would you like to connect to? What two people that don't know each other that know you would you like to connect together?
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how this group was. It was like the more questions I asked, the more other people were chiming in. That led to more questions.
Exactly.
And more connections.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had the courage to ask the questions, which gave other people not only the courage to ask questions, but the idea to ask a question to begin with.
Right.
Like maybe they wouldn't have even thought to ask the question if you wouldn't have asked the questions that you were asking.
That's exactly what was happening.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is a transit. There's two transits that Mercury is making prior to this alignment with the sun. So this is the point where Mercury is passing the sun now. Because remember, Mercury was retrograde. It was behind the sun. It was trailing the sun. And it's this week that Mercury passes the sun and will be moving forward in front of the sun until the next retrograde. Along the way, the first transit with Mercury leading up to the conjunction with the sun is a square to Saturn, the god of wealth and time, the planet of restriction, responsibility, hard work, achievement, and authority, transiting through the mutable water sign symbolized by the fish, Pisces. This occurs from June 11th to the 13th, Tuesday to Thursday, with an exact square on Wednesday, June 12th. Around this same time, from June 12th to the 14th, is when Mercury, like the sun, forms a sextile to Chiron in Aries, with an exact sextile occurring Thursday, June 13th. This alignment is occurring from Wednesday to Friday. So you've got the sun kind of all week aligning with Chiron, and then Mercury catching up to the sun. It squares Saturn and then sextiles Chiron like the sun and then forms a conjunction to the sun. So I'm thinking of this in terms of like a step-by-step process. The first step is Mercury squaring Saturn in Pisces. So Mercury is the planet of the conscious mind, transiting through the sign of consciousness, Gemini, squaring Saturn, the planet of reality, in the sign of the unconscious.
So what am I learning?
What am I learning
Mm-hmm.
about my unconscious? What is coming up? Where does my mind feel strained in some way? There may be some straining that is happening with the mind. This is, kind of midweek, Tuesday to Thursday. Maybe it has to do with this tension that's happening between your values and the group. Like you're trying to wrap your head around, how do I fit in? Or how do I find the right group? Where do my thoughts come from?
So it's what am I learning about myself via the group, perhaps?
Well, it's like, isn't it like you say, like what's happening in the conscious reality is something that's being reflected in the unconscious. So if you're,
I think of it as a cycle.
tell me what
So
you mean by that.
the Jungian lens mostly acknowledges the way that the unconscious affects our conscious reality. But we also know that our consciousness affects the unconscious.
Yes.
And the belief around that sort of perspective really started with Freud, because he's the one who acknowledged that we can actually repress things that are in our consciousness into the unconscious. So he really understood, it's interesting. We have all of these pivotal figures throughout sort of the development of psychology that sort of added their own flavor to the way that we understand the unconscious. And I think even though I'm primarily consider myself Jungian, I also think Freud's work was undoubtedly amazing as well. So,
and he was the
they worked
mentor
together.
to Jung, right? Yeah.
He was. He was, speaking of Saturn, he was a father figure to Jung. Absolutely. So we really can understand it as being cyclical, like everything else. You think of energy. Energy is not created or destroyed. Everything is a co-creation on an energetic level.
Yes.
So there's really no such thing as something ever just moving in one direction. Like, we know that nothing is really linear, even though that's how we orient towards like the concept of time, for example. But we know, I think we can all sort of feel that nothing's really linear.
There's more of a cyclical energy, which is what you see with the planets in these transits.
Exactly.
This is happening again like it did whatever date we said earlier.
Exactly. So the contents in our unconscious, and for example, with dreams, we can remember those when we're awake. So that's sort of one direction the energy can be flowing. And we also know whatever we maybe watch on TV or what we read, music we're listening to before we go to sleep can influence our dreams, can influence what happens in our unconscious.
Yes. I'm just thinking of this in terms of like the tension that's happening between you and the group is maybe creating something in your conscious reality where you're able to see there's tension here between me and the group that is waking you up to something that may exist within your unconscious that you were previously unaware of. That's what the Mercury squaring Saturn energy is.
So it's probably going to be bringing you to an awareness of an internal conflict.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
But we're seeing it on the outside.
Right. You might be blaming it on the group.
Yes, but it's actually something that exists within you.
It's probably within you.
Yes.
And it's probably whatever that same conflict is.
Yes, exactly. And so as we move from the squaring of Mercury and Saturn to the sextile with Chiron, it's having the courage to really acknowledge in a conscious way that I created this. This is because of my fear. This is because of my insecurity. Once we do that, and then the Mercury aligns with the sun represents the heart. So it's about loving yourself through this process and being grateful, having some gratitude around the conflict that occurred, the awareness that you now have of the conflict that has existed within yourself that has created this external conflict, having the courage to acknowledge that, but then also having the courage to love yourself through what may feel like some shame or regret. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, loving whatever you find
Because it feels like whatever's coming up, you may not like it. You're not liking the conflict between you and the group, but then when you realize that, oh, this is something that I've created within myself, you may feel guilty or shameful of what was once unconscious that has now been brought to your conscious awareness. So it's loving yourself through that process. Moving on to Venus, there's two aspects happening here with Venus before it moves into Cancer. The first one happens at the beginning of the week. This is Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, Lady Luck, the planet of relationships, transiting through Gemini, forming a sextile with Chiron. So this week we have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus all aligning with Chiron from Gemini. Venus's alignment occurs from Sunday to Wednesday with an exact sextile happening on Tuesday, June 11th. So from June 9th to the 12th, we're experiencing this. The same day that Mars squares off with Pluto is the day that Venus forms that sextile with Chiron. So it's taking a conscious look at your relationships and the fears and insecurities that exist within that construct. Not only within the group, but individual one-on-one relationships.
And the reality is those relationships are often showing us something that's just happening within our own system.
Yes, exactly. You are reflecting everyone that you come into contact with, and they are reflecting you. That's the beauty and the horror of life.
Yeah.
Is every individual that you come into contact with is showing you something about yourself that you can only see through them. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It's all there. So whatever conflict is happening within the group, it's like, well, it's the group's fault. I don't like this group and blah, blah, blah. Well, how is the group reflecting you? Oh, now I have to take that deeper look into myself. Oh, yeah, I'm this person. Now I'm embarrassed.
Well, here's a small example. You remember this from the last neighborhood we lived in. We always had people like revving their cars, revving their engines as they were driving by. And it used to drive me crazy.
Yeah.
Like I felt it, the distress of it so deeply in my body.
No, I know.
It was
I was there.
Very, yeah.
I got to experience your pain and suffering, my love.
Very dysregulating for me. And I realized part of why it was so irritating to me is that I wanted to actually do that.
You wanted to make that noise.
I wanted to have that experience of maybe being the disruptor in some way, but I don't typically allow myself to do that.
Yes.
And so now when I'm out driving, you know, I'm probably never going to be someone who will do it in a residential neighborhood, but, you know, on the freeway it's really fun to just let yourself accelerate. If you're ever not in Los Angeles traffic, if you really have the open road, but really allowing myself to have that experience on the other side of it, it is less bothersome to me now when I hear someone else do it. I still don't love it, but I recognize now that what that charge is really about.
Yes.
What it's really telling me about myself.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting.
And I only really do it when I'm in the car by myself. Like anyone who's ever ridden in the car with me would probably be like, oh, Gabriella doesn't drive like that. But when I'm by myself, I'm like, I could be on a racetrack.
Well, I remember when you came with me to visit my mom and her boyfriend was like, do you want to take my sports car and drive it around? And you were like, yeah. I was like,
you're like, who is this person?
really? Like, you care about this? Like, you were so excited to like get in this loud car and drive fast. So there is that sort of desire. You're angry at them because you're not experiencing that within yourself, which is what you wanted.
Right.
It's such a great example. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of that sort of awakening that's happening here this week within us, where there's things about the group that bother us, but we're going to realize that it's really bothering me because I want what they have.
Maybe I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Saturn is really encouraging us to take responsibility for ourselves, for what we want, for our reactions.
Yes, it's encouraging us to take responsibility for what's going on within our unconscious.
And to learn what is the message I'm supposed to be receiving right now.
Yes.
From this emotional exchange that I'm having.
Yes.
Learn the lesson so you can integrate it and move forward.
Yes. Yes. Love that. So as we move to the end of the week, Venus makes its final aspect from Gemini before it transits into Cancer. It forms a square with Neptune, the god of freshwater and the sea, the planet of illusion, deception, compassion, and intuition, transiting through Pisces, the sign that Neptune rules. This is at the final degree, the 29th degree. This occurs from Saturday, June 15th to Monday, June 17th, with an exact sextile occurring on Sunday, June 16th. The planet of relationships squaring off with the planet of dreams. Maybe by the end of the week, you're experiencing a loss of faith in terms of your relationships. You've gone through this challenging period of you and the group and facing your fears and insecurities and needing to ask questions and listen. And what you find is maybe something that you don't like. Maybe you become aware of something about a lover, a friend, or a business partner that you were unaware of before, and you feel disillusioned by that. And you need to reimagine the dream. Reimagine the dream of what relationships mean to me. So the senses could also feel dysregulated at this point, where you're not sure what you like or what you don't like. I thought I liked this, but now I guess I don't.
Maybe it's changing.
Maybe it's changing. Maybe it's shifting in some way. So I'm not even sure if I want to be friends with these people or not, or it can be very confusing. But as we conclude the week, Venus transits into Cancer. Right after it forms that square with Neptune in Pisces, Venus transits into the cardinal water sign, symbolized by the crab. Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the moon. It represents the past, our roots, our upbringing, our childhood, the ones who raised and nurtured us, our ancestors. So as we conclude Venus's transit through Gemini, and it squares off with Neptune, and we feel that sense of confusion around the senses and relationships right before it moves into Cancer, which is going to encourage us to look at the roots, the origins of our relationships and our senses. Where do they stem from? This is from June 16th to July 11th, where do I get this value from?
We're looking at our personal history.
Yes.
Speaking of history.
Yes, exactly.
Also maybe gaining awareness of how things have changed for us by reflecting on the past.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Why do I like this food? Why do I like this music? Is it really just come from me? Maybe. Probably not. There may have been, most likely, other influences in your life that are the reason why you like what it is you like. Like I think about growing up, I loved the Beatles. Why? My mom loved the Beatles. She had a framed picture of like her first Beatles album, which is like their 4 floating heads, and they're wearing like these black turtlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
It's still framed in her house. And it's the actual record that she bought in like 1962 or 63, which was like the first Beatles album that came out. And so I grew up seeing this in my house. And as a kid, I'm like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I start listening to music, and my mom's enjoying the music as I'm listening to it, so I'm enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned food too.
Food?
Which is
Yes.
often, whatever foods you're exposed to in childhood can often become, you acquire a taste for that. And if it's connected to your family or a larger sense of culture, then it can really connect us to that food.
Yes, exactly. And so when you think of Venus, it's not only the planet of relationships, it's the planet that rules the senses. The reason why I'm in relationship with somebody is because we like similar things. We might not like everything the same, but there's got to be some crossover between our likes and dislikes. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense. And so we're looking, as Venus transits through Cancer, June 16th to July 11th, we're looking at the roots, the origins of our sensory desires or satisfactions, and the people that we've created relationships with because of these senses, because of these likes and dislikes. And so coming on the heels of that Venus squaring Neptune, the confusion, it's inviting us to take that confusion and look upon our past.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm confused about a relationship that I'm having right now, I need to think back to the last time I felt a similar sense of confusion in relationship. And then I need to go back to the first time I felt that sense of confusion in relationship.
Well, I like this invitation you gave around like thinking about the roots.
Yes. Where does it stem from? What's the origin?
Because that really, it takes time. You plant a seed, it grows into a tree.
Yep.
There's this intricate root system.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really just feeling the grounding, the invitation
Yes.
to really connect with the grounding quality
Yes.
of this particular transit.
Absolutely. Get into your past.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense of it. Make sense of your past. Venus is the planet that rules the senses.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense of your past.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
What were you going to say? Something else? You had another point.
Yeah, I'm thinking too how during this Gemini season, we've been emphasizing asking questions of others, which I think is a really important part of the process. But this also feels like a shift maybe to engage with questions within your own system. And I think this is a really important differentiator. And this comes up a lot in energy work. When I think about the relationship between your crown chakra on the top of your head and your third eye, so the 6th and the 7th chakras, I think about that crown chakra about receiving information from the external world, so asking questions outside of your system, versus the 6th chakra, the third eye, I think of that more as asking questions of yourself, of your own intuition, your own system.
Yes.
And we know that if we're asking questions in kind of one realm when really we should be in the other, we're not really going to find the answer. Like if you're the one who needs to be asking questions of yourself, if you're the one who has the answer, you're never going to get it from an outside source.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
So I love everything that you're saying right now. This is just making me think about how these signs, the ebb and flow, how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Venus is the leading planet right now. It's the planet that's out in front. So it's like we're leading with love. Venus is the first planet to transit into Cancer. All the other planets are behind it. There's still Chiron in the North Node in Aries, which is, who am I? And then there's Uranus in Taurus, which is, what do I need? Based on, I know who I am now. So because I know who I am, now I know what I need. Then you have the Sun and Mercury. Mars is also in Taurus as well. So Uranus and Mars in Taurus. Then you have the Sun and Mercury in Gemini, which now that I know what I know what I need to ask for. And I also know what I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So we go from who am I? What do I need? What do I want to learn? To back to where does this all come from? It's like now that I've received all this new information and I've been able to filter it through my soul, the physical manifestation of my soul, I've got all these new ideas floating around. It's maybe making me question myself,
Mm-hmm.
question who I am, question what I value. So in order to get more clarity about who I am and what I value, I need to go back to the roots of where that all began, which is the Cancer energy.
Absolutely.
And that's where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last time Venus transited through Cancer was March 7th to June 5th, 2023. The time before that was July 17th to August 11th, 2022. So think back to those dates for clues on what could be in store for you this time around as Venus transits through Cancer June 16th to July 11th. And for those of you that were born with key astrological points in Aries or Libra, there may be challenges in terms of your relationships and your relationship to your own sensory awareness as Venus transits through Cancer. Because Aries is cardinal fire, Libra is cardinal air, Cancer is cardinal water. Air and water don't mix, and fire boils water, water extinguishes fire. So there's tension there. So be mindful of which planets in your astrological code are in Aries and or Libra. What degrees are they at? Where is Venus transiting? Where is Venus transiting? When is it going to square off with these planets? And of course, if you're curious to know about how this transit, any transit, or if you're curious about your astrological code or how any of these transits are affecting you, I encourage you to contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com.
Okay. Our first question comes from Tom X10. Taurus Moon, Venus in Aquarius, Midheaven in Pisces with its ruler Neptune in my 8th house, and also in Aquarius conjunct Venus. If I'm going to create a cartoon, will the taboo be naturally involved?
Wow. A cartoon.
That's kind of a cool question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
really making me
I didn't realize
think
that's
here.
where it was going to go.
Well, I guess so, Tom X10, because your Venus, the planet of the senses, is conjunct Neptune, the planet of dreams, in the 8th house. And when I think of the taboo, I think of the 8th house, because the 8th house is the house of death.
Mm-hmm. And Aquarius can be kind of taboo also. Right?
Well, Aquarius is like the taboo out in the open. It's the taboo in the open. Like I think of Aquarius, so I think of the 8th house in Scorpio as they represent the taboo. It's in the shadows. It's hidden. Can't talk about that.
But some people are very open with their taboos.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like there's this actress, Julia Fox.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Taurus Moon. She's an Aquarius Sun, though. And if you Google images of her at public events, she is wearing the most shockingly risque clothing that you could imagine.
I think I've seen a couple images. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, like she
goes there.
She goes there. But she's an Aquarius. So like when you say like, well, Aquarius can be kind of taboo. It's the taboo in the public realm.
Right.
It's, I think of Aquarius as like coming out of the closet.
Mm-hmm. Taking the taboo in the closet and coming out with it.
Coming out with, Scorpio is the taboos in the closet. Aquarius is the taboos out of the closet.
Mm-hmm.
And like I saw a quote from her recently that said that she has been celibate for the last 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. But yet it's such a funny Aquarius thing, because Aquarius is like so rebellious, but also so conservative. It's like she's basically wearing her underwear under a trench coat. It's like like metal underwear under a trench coat, and like showing it to everyone, but then also saying, I'm not having sex.
She's really highlighting the paradox of that Aquarius energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so wild. So yes, to answer your question, Tom X10, if I'm going to create a cartoon, will the taboo naturally be involved? I would say yes. I mean, the fact that you're asking that question to begin with says yes to me right there. So I'm very curious to see what the cartoon is that you are creating.
Yeah, please share it with us.
Share it with us, yes. And thank you
for to see it.
Yes, thank you for your question.
Cool. Our next question comes from Natalie. Thoughts on the different house systems? I've been using whole sign because it's easy to visualize from someone's ascendant, but I could be swayed into another depending on what it does to my own chart.
Yeah, well, I encourage you to try Placidus and see what it does to your own chart. That's what I use, is Placidus, tropical calculations. It's, whole sign is easier to comprehend because the signs don't intersect between the houses. It's like if you're a Libra rising, then your first house begins at Libra, and your second house begins at Scorpio, and your third house at Sagittarius, and so on and so forth.
So it's cleaner in some way.
Yes, absolutely. But the reality is, the sun doesn't go from here to here in a minute, which is what it does in whole sign. It goes from here to here. There's no incremental rising. It's like as soon as the rising sign goes from Libra to Scorpio, everything shifts dramatically. So there are nuances that I think might be missed using whole sign that are greater appreciated using Placidus.
I see.
So
And maybe more or less of that depending on someone's chart.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yes. I just did a reading for somebody who uses whole sign, and I was showing them their chart Placidus and reading where the planets were in different houses, different to what they were used to from whole sign. And they're like, oh my God, yeah, that sounds so much like me.
Interesting.
Yes.
So they, in this example, they found it to be a better representation of themselves. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Yes. And also, if you're dealing with the transits as well, there's greater accuracy to when planets are moving into different houses.
Mm-hmm.
So how the planets are affecting you energetically dramatically shifts from using Placidus to whole sign.
I think that there's an instance in my chart where this is really different too.
Oh, yeah.
So I think in my chart, if we're looking at whole sign, my North Node's in the 11th house, but using Placidus, it's in the 10th house.
Mm-hmm.
And I resonate with it much more being in the 10th house.
Yes. So I encourage you, Natalie, well, thank you for the question, first of all, but I encourage you to try out Placidus.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to me for a reading. I'd love to read your chart and and see how it resonates with you, or enroll in a moon cycle class where you can see where the planets are transiting there. You know, it does take a minute to wrap your brain around the houses and the signs and that sort of stuff when you're using Placidus, because nothing is equal.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be an intercepted house, or all the signs are straddling different houses. So it's like, wait, if it's in Capricorn, is it in my 5th house or my 6th house? It's like, well, it all depends on the degree.
Right.
So play around with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Hope that's helpful to you.
Our last question comes from Happenstances. How can I make sense of my North Node, South Node axis? My North Node is in Gemini and conjuncts my Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Chiron, but it's all in the 9th house. How should I be thinking about Sagittarius energy?
Wow. Love this one. Thank
this
you,
is
Ham.
really relevant to the last couple episodes we've had.
Oh, for sure, too. Yes. With all the Gemini energy. So thank you for the question, Happenstances. This is one of the complexities of when you have like an upside down chart. Like, I imagine that Happenstances is either a Libra rising or a Virgo rising, maybe a Scorpio rising. People that were born with one of those 3 rising signs will typically have planets that are in signs that are they're in one sign, but they're in the house that's opposite the energy of the sign.
Right.
So Happenstances was born with the North Node in Gemini in the 9th house, and the South Node in Sagittarius in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is associated with the 3rd sign, which is Gemini. The 9th house is associated with the 9th sign, which is Sagittarius. So Happenstances has the North Node in Gemini in the house that represents Sagittarius, and the South Node in Sagittarius in the house that represents Gemini. So how do you make sense of that? You know, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because, you know, you think of the Gemini energy as like, so I need to let go of that Sagittarius energy and focus on the Gemini energy. But what am I supposed to do when that Gemini energy is in the Sagittarius house?
How perfect is this, though, for a North Node in Gemini?
It's a great question.
To have so many questions about your chart.
Exactly. So the way that I think about this Happenstances is the sign is the energy that you want to develop. So the energy that you're here to develop is Gemini. which is asking questions, gathering information, learning a little bit about a lot, connecting with a lot of different people, quick trips, weekend getaways, the bullet points, the cliff notes. But the house is where?
The environment.
It's where you want to develop that energy. So happenstances, being a North Node in Gemini in the 9th house, is when I think of the 9th house, I think of religion, higher learning, spirituality, higher education. So the energy that you want to develop is asking questions, gathering information, learning a little bit about a lot when it comes to religion, spirituality, higher learning, higher education,
Travel. Mm-hmm.
You want to learn to ask really honest questions. Like the questions that you are asking are maybe deeper than the average North Node in Gemini. So like if somebody was born with the North Node in Gemini in the 7th house, which is the house of marriage, then you need to be asking questions, gathering information, learning a little bit about a lot when it comes to your close personal relationships. But Gemini North Node in the 9th house is about asking those deeper questions, asking some real big picture questions. I would think of happenstances as somebody who might thrive as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But a teacher that's not up there pontificating all of their knowledge, but is inviting the questions that is helping the students learn.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could think of yourself as a philosopher or a social media guru, but you are somebody who is inviting other people on and you're asking them questions. You're learning from them. So you're creating a platform that you can stand on, but also invite others, and you are facilitating the questions to them to answer those sort of big questions. Why are we here? What does life mean?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's helpful to you.
This is one of kind of the interesting paradoxes that we talked about paradox earlier, but here it is again.
Mm-hmm.
And we often have, many different kind of juxtapositions in each individual chart because human beings are complex. So this is just a great example of how that can show up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome, Gabriella.
And thanks for everyone for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to the weekly transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits or any others may be affecting you, or if you are interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. If you're interested in delving into the world of psychotherapy with Gabriella, you can connect with her at innervisionpsychotherapy.com. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.